every month, but little after shooting cases, and it's doing young Asian women who shoot like this, so they burst through the, testing, so it's really funny.
Well, it's interesting because.
We're live.
First they figure out you have pneumonia, because they figure out leaving it where it doesn't come from antibody. And you say, oh, by the way.
So what time is it?
7:07.
It is 7:07. Let's call the meeting to order. We are getting an echo, so I guess you need to mute over there. Okay. So, good evening all. I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair land use for Manhattan Community Board 12. Welcome to the November 5th meeting. Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to have my fellow committee members introduce themselves. So I'll begin at my right.
Okay, Melissa Sims, and I'm an Inwood resident, and I'm also a member of the licensing committee.
Thank you. And so going to my left.
I'm Vivian Ducat from Washington Heights, and I'm a public member.
I'm Eitan Steinbaum from Washington Heights, first year on the board, law student, member of this committee, and of Parks.
I'm Jim Berlin, I'm the board parliamentarian, I've been on the board for 44 years, so I've been around. I'm also on the traffic and transportation.
I'm Heidi Guzman. I am the vice chair of this committee. I'm also on health and environment, and I'm from Washington Heights.
My name is Daniel. I am on Parks and Daniel Bonilla. I'm on Parks and Cultural Affairs, and I just got here.
Thank you,
I'm from
Daniel.
Washington Heights, so.
And we also have online a board member, Indiana Porta. I believe she's en route and will be here physically
Oh, wow.
in about 3 minutes, according to her message. Let me see, do I have any other board members? We do not. We have Audrey Wachs from Department of City Planning, and Department of City Planning shows up to our meetings quite regularly, and we appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So we have two things we're going to cover at tonight's meeting before we get into any old or new business. Last month, we had a review of the Land Use 101 training, which we deferred to tonight's meeting to allow us to talk about some of the ballot proposals that we voted on yesterday. And also, when we were working on the capital and budget expense priorities, something that came up is the desire for both land use and housing and human services to confer and see what we might do in terms of identifying priorities. So we're going to begin that conversation tonight. And our chair of Housing and Human Services, Indiana Porter, who I mentioned was on her way, has just arrived. So
Speaking of the devil.
I will move from where I am now to get to the other projector and walk through the Land Use 101, literally, and then we'll be standing, and then we can take questions, and then we can move into our discussion about housing and land use plan. So give me a minute.
Well, if you do it real quick, we'll be off stage.
Behave yourself. So, I just want to point out that the Borough President's Office just finished their series of training. In past years, Land Use 101 was one of the trainings offered. Now, you notice this year, I believe last year, they did not do that. And so many people on the committee have gone through this training before. We have a lot of new members with us, so I thought it would be useful to, just to go through this for our own benefit. So some of the things we're going to cover, as it says there, and actually, can someone who's near check with the people online to see if they can hear me?
Can everyone hear?
Yes.
Can you guys hear? Yes?
Okay, good. And can they see the screen?
And can you see that screen over there? Can you see it's objectives on the screen?
Can you share that now?
somehow or not?
Maybe
Well, I think it should be
Oh,
shared.
it should be shared.
it's not being shared.
It's not being shared?
Try to share it.
Let me,
Oh, see, Audrey, you can't see the screen?
I can't see the screen.
Here, Audrey.
OC's
Okay,
online?
I can't hear.
Yeah.
Audrey, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Still can't hear.
And
I can't see the screen. I'm
Okay,
not sure about
thank you.
others. Yeah.
being shared. Share.
That was the one from last week. Super cool.
Can you see it now?
And this was somebody's.
Looks like it is, right? Yep, they can.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm like, today I actually feel much better, but on Sunday and Monday I was beat. It's like,
That'll do it.
Wow, these are so heavy, I'd be beat from walking around.
I know, tell me about it. That's what someone said. I was like, it's a marathon of itself is walking with these things. I think I just wanted to show you guys. This is like the last time I'm like bringing it out because
We respect you anyway.
I'm like I like showing them because they're cool. Like this one alone is cool, but just walking around with this
So,
is like so fancy.
We're gonna just briefly go through what's zoning, what it does, its history, and, what some of the tools that can help us, understand zoning. And actually, as projects come before us, as applications come before us, seeking our approval or just for our comments on discretionary actions, understand, what we're being asked and why. So just, I want you to know that this presentation includes materials that have been put together by the Department of City Planning and by the Borough President's Office. This is not their presentation, they're not blessing it, but it has materials that they've put together. We've revised some of that so that it's more specific for us. And also, think of this as, truly a 101, a first step, because based on last year's adoption of City of Yes, there are a number of things in the zoning resolution that need to be updated. So when this is done again by city planner or whomever, there will be some things in there that are not in there now. If you are looking at, and let me see if I can get rid of this. There. So this is just for reference. If we're looking at, a zoning map, this is what it looks like. We often talk about, R10 or R8 or whatever. The map will have the blocks and streets divided, and each of these designations relates to the kind of use, the density of use that's permitted there. And, we'll get into more detail on that later. And also, if you were to pull up on City Planning's website a zoning map or go to Zola, this is what you will see. So, what is zoning? And, simply put, zoning controls what can be built where and, how big, how much of it. It tells you, can it be residential, can it be office space, and it tells you, can it be, a building that is 4 times the size of the lot or 10 times the size of the lot. It's the legal framework within which building can occur. I wish I could get this to be full screen, but I mess with it.
There you go.
No, that's
Cuts it off.
Oh, that's better. That's better. That does.
Walk away, Dan.
Walk away. Yes.
Don't touch.
So, as this was, zoning, tells you what you can build, establish, the development patterns, and then it's the size of it. It does not generate actual development projects, and that's important. As we've gone through, you know, if you remember when we were talking about the Inwood rezoning, or going back years to Sherman Creek rezoning, although the zoning would allow for things to be built, it's not a development project. So because it would allow for 1,000 units to be built, that doesn't mean there's a plan to build 1,000 units of housing. It doesn't require anything to be built, it doesn't require anything to be, you know, demolished. And it also, and we get into this quite frequently, zoning doesn't dictate architectural style. So you might be in an area that has a lot of Art Deco buildings. The zoning will control if buildings can be basically the size of those buildings, but it wouldn't stop you from doing a steel and glass building there. It doesn't control architectural style. If it's a landmark district, that controls style. If there's zoning that has, in some cases, there's special zoning districts where city planning has created an overlay that might have some design controls, but normal zoning does not control design at it. Terminology. Floor area ratio, FAR, is something we're going to discuss all the time, and that is simply the multiplier that is used to determine, you know, how much you can build on your site. So if your site is, you know, 10,000 square feet, if you have an FAR of 1, you can build 10,000 square feet. If you have an FAR of 2, you can build 20,000. You can build it as a single-story building, you can build it as 2 or 3. I mean, these buildings, although they're different heights, they're all the same density. And that's another important thing. We often get into conversations where folks will look at a building and they'll talk about it being too dense. What they're really talking about, it's tall. And a great example, if you look at Dyckman houses, those buildings are taller than the buildings around them, but they're much less dense. They have so much open space. The older apartment buildings are much denser than Dyckman houses, so there's a difference between density and height. This is easier to see if you pull it up either in the zoning handbook or, you know, online. You have different zoning categories: residential, commercial, mixtures of retail and commercial, general business, manufacturing, and then you have different levels of density from like R1, R10, hard to see here, and then C1 through C8 in manufacturing. So the higher the number that follows the letter, the higher the density. So, you know, an R2 would be less dense than an R7. Where we are is predominantly R7-2, which is considered a medium density zoning district. There's some overlays, you know, for the hospital and others that are different, but in general, where we are is R7-2, or there are some areas west of Broadway, and that's in Washington Heights, but also in West Harlem, going down to the west side, that are R8, which is a higher density. And I don't know why that is, but if you check even older maps, there's this east and west of Broadway break where west of Broadway has a higher density. The term "as of right," and this is something that we deal with all the time. And community residents or board members will look at a proposed project and ask, you know, how can they build that? If the zoning allows, for example, for residential and an FAR of 6, and that's what's being built, that means legally they're within the parameters, that is, as of right. They're not asking for any waivers, they're not asking for any special permits, they're not asking for anything outside of what the law permits, and so community boards are not asked to weigh in on anything. City planning, landmarks, there's no discretionary action. They just have to comply with, you know, building code, fire codes, but there's no discretionary action. They are able to build whatever they want. If we think it's ugly, we can say it's ugly. If we think it's out of place, we can say it's out of place. But, you know, we have no control over that because there's no discretionary action. They are following the law. And as we get into some further slides, there are some things that are driven by what zoning requires. And one of my professors years ago said that if you get what you want, ask for, you know, it. And in many cases, what we're getting is what zoning is asking for. And if we don't like it, then the zoning should be changed so that it would ask for something that is more in line with what we would like. Jim?
I just wanted to add that if they build something as of right, they don't have to come to the community board.
Exactly. They don't have to. Some people will. I mean, for example, the hospital and the university often will come and give us a heads up. The School of Nursing, for example, I don't believe there was any discretionary action, but they briefed us on that. The addition to the research and development building that's moving up quickly once again, that's pursuant to the plan that was developed, but they came and I think they briefed us and they briefed health and environment. But they don't have to do that, but there are some folks who will. The term building envelope. The building envelope is literally the maximum amount of square footage that zoning will allow you to put on your site. It doesn't mean you have to maximize it, but that is the most you are allowed to do as of right. So the dotted line is showing the building envelope, that's as big as they can build. The mass is showing the proposed design. So the proposed design is smaller than what's allowed, but when we talk about the building envelope, that's what is meant by the building envelope. And I just want to point out that we use building envelope in two ways. In zoning, that's what it means. Architecturally, however, something when we talk about the building envelope, what we're talking about is the walls and roof that are enclosing the physical space. So if you're doing if someone came and they're talking about a restoration project and they're talking about the building envelope, they're not talking about the zoning envelope. They're talking about the walls, the roof, the exterior of the building that might need to be, restored or whatever.
So not a big bag to mail a building.
It's not a big bag to mail a building. Bulk refers to, and that's what I was saying, there's a difference between height and bulk. Bulk refers to the amount of square footage that is on the lot. So I think what these diagrams are showing, 2, 3, and 4, they're configured differently, but it's the same bulk.
And there's no setback.
But yeah, but I
That
mean,
doesn't matter.
no, I mean, you can cover almost the entire site and have no setback. You can have a little setback if the building would be a story or two higher, or you can have more of a setback and go even higher. You can keep playing, it's like if you have a set of blocks, you can configure the blocks as many, but you don't have any more blocks. You can just play with them the way you want to. Except when we get to the sky exposure frame, that's later. And so this is, I mean, there are different city agencies that have roles. We deal a lot with city planning, and city planning's on with us. We also integrate with the
ESA.
Landmarks Preservation, Board of Standards and Appeals. If you have a project that is almost as of right, but there's something that doesn't quite fit, there are special permits that you can ask for, there are waivers, and that goes to the Board of Standards and Appeals. And going back to one of the ballot proposals was to take certain things that are now done by city planning and move it over to Board of Standards and Appeals. The history of the Board of Standards and Appeals is when New York City first created zoning in 1916. And how many lawyers do we have in the room? 1,
Well,
2,
student.
3, 4?
The
So,
equitable building.
In order to defend against someone saying there was a taking of property or value, the Board of Standards and Appeals was created to basically provide a relief valve. So if you're saying that there's some hardship that's created by zoning, you can go to the Board of Standards and Appeals and seek a waiver, a special permit, something that could address that. And as I recall, both zoning and the landmarks law, when they were first initiated, of course, there were legal challenges, and those legal challenges failed. But absent the Board of Standards and Appeals, zoning might have been, slightly different. And of course, the building department. The building department will look at a set of plans And in addition to determining if it meets code, as I mentioned, when we do as a grant has to meet code, they will see whether or not the project is consistent with zoning. And if they reject your plans because it's not consistent with zoning, that's when you end up going to the Board of Standards and Appeals for something, or the city planning for something, because they're saying, well, you know, you're building a residential building in a manufacturing zone, zoning doesn't allow that, we can't approve your plans. Or you're building at a density that the zoning doesn't allow, or there's something about a building department, they do not write zoning, they don't control zoning, but when they review your plans, they want to make sure it complies with zoning. If it doesn't, you're out.
And don't they always come to us as wanting people who have plans who are gonna go to BSA, don't they come for us for our opinion? Even if they ignore it in the end? I feel
Well,
like-
part of the process is, the Board of Standards and Appeals requires the applicant to, contact, I believe, the community board within which the project is to take
Right.
place. And, you know, it is done by them, it's also done by the board. Anything that we do is advice, it is not mandatory, but, you know, depending upon the relationship that, you know, you create with the Board of Standards, with the city planning, you get more or less of that. But also, with the elected officials, what we recommend is just a recommendation. The city council rep, or the borough president, but I think in particular the city council rep, they can put in requirements that are legally binding, we cannot. So who does what, and we were saying that there are a number of agencies. So city planning provides technical assistance, we rely on them quite frankly all the time. The city planning commission, however, is the body that actually, you know, enacts the zoning and enacts these changes. So it's like the city, Department of City Planning is like the staff, and the commission is the commission. The Board of Standards and Appeals I mentioned, they can grant, you know, variances, special permits. DOB interprets and enforces, as I mentioned, you know. Once it's done, whatever is passed, they just interpret that. Landmarks preservation, if something is of historic importance and has been so designated, then, you know, you have to get their opinion either at the staff level, if it's less minor, or at the commission level, if it's something that, particularly if it's impacting the exterior. And then, you know, HPD and Department of Transportation, we don't deal with them as much, but I think in my time on the board and others, I mean, we've slowly dealt with city planning, BSA many, many times. We've reached out to DOB, we've dealt with landmarks. So these are agencies that you can expect as land use committee members to, at some point, you know, have to provide some kind of feedback to.
Wayne, I have a question.
And when you think of zoning, it's not a standalone, it is one of many tools that's used. So we're talking about housing, but there's the zoning and the land use. There are community resources, there are jobs and businesses. It's all of this working together to try to achieve a certain plan that city planning or the mayor's office has, you know, put together to try to drive economic development and try to revitalize a certain area. If you look at some of the work that was done in the South Bronx or in Harlem or downtown, yes, they wanted to have housing, but they also wanted to have, you know, commercial and retail, so it's not just a housing community. In some cases, you had schools or other institutions, they wanted to strengthen those so they were community anchors. It's like, what are all the things you want to pull together so that, you know, your plan is not just a single item, but it's something that, you know, reinforces. I think at one point HPD had a program or a concept called building lots, where every program they had, they would go into an area, and when we leave, we're going to make sure that every program that we have that can be of assistance has been applied in the area. So it's not just home ownership, but it might be home ownership, it might be assistance for renters, it might be something else. It's everything that they can provide. Look at the area, see what they need, and don't do one, do everything that you can do. but that was years ago. I don't know if that still exists.
Wayne, I have a
Hula, that
question.
was something else that was on the ballot. You know, the uniform land use review process is one of the critical things that community boards citywide play a role in. And anytime there's going to be a change to, you know, zoning and some other actions, after an application has been certified by the Department of City Planning, the first entity it goes to is the community board, or if it's citywide, all community boards. And in the current process, we have 60 days to review and comment, and then it goes to the borough president, and then it goes to the city planning commission and to the council. And not getting into the politics, but one of the discussions was 60 and 30 gives you 90, and one of the proposals is to take this and move it into here, so it's 60 days period end of story in certain cases. But we have dealt with so many ULURP applications in my time here, and you know, it's one of the things that community boards are mandated to do. We play a critical role, and so just understanding the ULURP process is something that is important. History of zoning. I mentioned New York had zoning for the first time in 1916, and this is cited as the reason why. There might be others, but this is the Equitable Building, and it's a 42-story building, and the concern is it went straight up from its property line, 42 stories, no setbacks. And the concern is if you continue to build like that, you would have no light, no air, conceptually at the street level. And so that was the impetus for the 1916 zoning resolution. What is interesting, however, is that building is now a landmark. 124. If you've been there, the lobby is gorgeous and huge. It has a connection to the subway. Who is in there? Is Landmarks in there? Or is City Planning in that building? I think Landmarks is actually, their offices are now in this building.
In 120 Broadway, you said?
Yes.
It's our
And what's
offices.
also interesting, if you know the area, there are new buildings that dwarf this building. But the interesting thing is, there are new buildings that dwarf the building, but they set back. They follow sort of the 1961 zoning, where there are plazas. So you have more space at the street level, and we'll get into that.
Isn't that that group that came in like 2 months ago in that building too?
What group?
Oh my God, the art commission people.
Municipal Art Society?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't think so.
But they're on the east side.
Yeah, I think they're further uptown. But that could be. I mean, I was just in there. There are architectural firms in there, engineering firms. I mean, it's a nice building.
Building
But
management.
you know, the point is, if you can imagine, if you just had a series of 42-story buildings, going straight up, and even between the two, if you're in an office here, you're like looking into the other. But that's what caused folks to be concerned with that. And also the concern was a building like this would adversely impact the property values around it because you're taking away light, air views. But it's just, I just find it interesting that the thing that triggered zoning, it's still standing today. It's not viewed as, a big white elephant. It is in fact considered New York City landmark. So what did 1916 zoning do? And these are sketches by a gentleman named Hugh Farris, who did a number of them. The whole idea is requiring the building to set back as it goes up, as opposed to rising, straight up. And the idea is you have, controls over height and controlling setbacks. That you would have better public health and safety. And one of the things that if you're an architect or or even engineers, one of the things that you get licensed for is not your creativity, but it's your ability to understand and to design buildings that promote public health and safety, that, safe buildings. But also one of the things that zoning did that wasn't really institutionalized at the time was separating uses so you don't have residential and manufacturing and industrial in particular all mixed together. Prior to that, there were not controls that would prohibit a factory from being built next to an apartment building. And this is fascinating. I mean, when I was in undergrad school, we had a whole class on the history of housing. But if you look at, residential footprint of buildings, before any regulation, you basically have light in the front and the back and everything else, you're walking from room to room. You have no light in there. You have the old law tenements, which had like the narrow light shafts, so, you get, in theory, some light in here, but not much. Then the new law tenements, which gave you wider light shafts. And I remember one of my professors argued, even luxury Park Avenue buildings are basically just elevated new law tenements. Because it's the same idea that you have to have, you have openings at the front and back. You're required to have, I think, typically deeper backyards now. In some cases, the older buildings, the backyards might have been 8 feet. So you have 8 feet and then another 8 feet, so you have 2 separate buildings that are only 16 feet apart. But you have light in front and the back, you have wider courtyards, and then in the case of the luxury buildings, you have elevators. In other buildings, you have walk-ups. As I mentioned, we have different densities going from R1 to R10. I think in City of Yes, we have now, is it R11 and R12? So we'll see how that, that's one of the things that has to change. So this is what I mentioned. So we had zoning in 1916. That was around for a while. Post-World War II, downtown, the financial district was kind of dying. You had a lot more cars. There were changes to sort of design and planning thoughts. This building actually predates the 1961 zoning. The Seagram's building is 1958. But this is often cited as the model for the 1961, because basically this is an as-of-right building. All of this is private property. It's all part of the site. They set the building back. This is Lubin Meeks van der Rohe, one of the masters of modern architecture. Set the building back, created this plaza, and the building just goes straight up. So unlike the Equitable building, where it goes straight up at its property line, this goes straight up. This is actually much taller than the building, but it gives you this generous plaza up front. And if you think of, let's say, 6th Avenue now, many of those, where you can walk for blocks, the buildings are set back and they have plaza in front, that's the model. So this is where, we started to introduce the idea of the sky exposure plane, that there's this invisible line, and once you hit it, that's when you need to start setting back. And in the older buildings, often it's referred to as the wedding cakes. They're starting at the property line and they're going straight up, and then they hit the sky exposure plane, so they have to set back a little bit, then they go up a little bit more, then they set back. And some of those buildings can be very elegant, and other folks think they can be a little clunky, depending on who's designing it. This avoids that altogether by saying, set the building back so far that you go straight up and you don't break the sky exposure plane. And, in theory, you can keep doing that until you get a little needle, but this is a very different idea. It hooks the idea of towers in the park, which is kind of out of like modern architecture in the 30s and 40s. And also, as I said, the impact of the automobile in the urban environment. So this is a very different mindset than 1960. And it was the first major change in zoning since the city had zoning. Since 1961, there are a number of things that have been introduced. We don't have a lot of these, but we talked about contextual zoning. I think that started to be discussed a lot in the 80s. Mixed-use districts. the public realm. We often talk now about the quality of the public realm. So that is, you know, more recognized in discussion of zoning, affordable housing, what that means and how it can be achieved. And then, of course, now, resiliency and sustainability. All of these are things that are, you know, now being incorporated into zoning. And we've actually passed a few resolutions commenting on waterfront zoning and resiliency. And I believe WEAC may be coming to housing, no, to health and environment to talk about sustainability plan. They presented to CB9 some time ago. They were not able to make it to tonight's meeting because the person who's doing it is flying in from somewhere else, but we may be able to get them to talk about that. So, you know, going beyond bulk and setback, there are a range of other things that impact, you know, the public environment that zoning has, you know, sort of morphed to consider. So I mentioned, you know, we started talking about contextual zoning in the 80s, and the idea of quality housing and the building envelope. The 1961 zoning might allow, or rather encourage you to do this, to set back, have space around the and go up. And that can be fine because, you know, streets can be tight, they can be narrow. You can have older buildings that have windows on the side, and if you build a building next to it, you're blocking that. Increasingly, folks like the idea of, you know, sort of having a continuous street wall. And so in quality housing, you actually get a slight zoning bump if you design in a way that you maintain the street wall and you sort of maintain the height. If you have a setback, you push it back so that it's not as visible. So it's not really controlling the design, but it's saying that if you do certain things to your building envelope, like in an R72 district, typically you go to a density of 3.44. But if you do quality housing and you do things that zoning wants to do, you go to a density of 4. So you get a little bit, you can build a little bit more, but you have to do it within a set of rules. Sure.
So the quality housing rules from 1987 allowed it to go, like allowed it to be built there?
No.
Further back?
No, this is quality housing.
Okay.
And this is the typical 1961 height factor zoning. So height factor zoning, what that means is you have the ability to, you do not have a height limit. You cannot break the sky exposure plane, but in theory you can keep setting back like the pyramids until you go to heaven. In quality housing, while you get a zoning bump, you actually have a height limit. So typically in quality housing, you can have a, you know, depending on which district you're in. So as if you're in R7 district, you have a different maximum height than if you're in R8 or R9. So think of this as 1960 and think of this as 1980s.
How do the super talls fit into all of this with zoning?
Well, you have to look at what is the zoning where they're located. I mean, if that's basically a commercial area, what's permitted as of right? I mean, 59th Street, 57th Street, that's not a low-density area. And that was one of the points I recall that we made when we were looking at City of Yes, and we were proposing R11 and R12. The only place in Manhattan where buildings that currently exist is like in the theater district going west. They're very tall buildings. And mapping them anywhere else on the Upper West Side, those buildings will be dramatically out of context. But I don't know what is the zoning, I don't know off the top of my head, you know, from, you know, 59th Street to 57th Street. You have a lot of office buildings there, so it may be perfectly permissible. But the other thing is, if they're doing height factor zoning, I mean, if you're making these narrower buildings, I mean, it allows you to go up. And the other thing, remember, a resolution we passed where people would get cute with the mechanical rooms, which don't count towards the square footage.
They stick in.
And so they would have like a mechanical room that's 5 stories tall in the middle of the building, so that the residential units can be even higher up and have better views and go for more money. And so there are, you know, all kinds of design tricks that people do. Mixed use development. Interestingly, in 1916, you're separating uses. Mixed use developments allow for compatible things to exist, you know, in the same district. So I mean, we're not talking about Charles Dickens here, but you know, this allows for areas to be not just zoned for a single type of use. And there are many neighborhoods that predate zoning where you had some commercial, some retail, even maybe some light manufacturing, nothing hazardous, with residential in there. And it wasn't a problem then, it's not a problem now, except if you were trying to do that now, or if you were trying to do a major renovation or restoration or a new installation, the zoning would allow you to do that. The fact that across the street might be exactly what you are trying to do, and you say it's been there for 30 years, people love it, but if 1961, if the zoning changed, and this is now strictly a residential area, the old use is grandfathered, it can stay. A new use that would be exactly the same cannot exist, unless they went to BSA. The public realm, you know, the waterfront parks, North Cove, and this is actually, you know, looking at some of the stuff happening in Inwood where we've been talking about the connecting a series of waterfront parks with a continuous esplanade, so that is looking at, you know, the public realm as part of what we are talking about, what we're thinking about, when we're looking at how we are planning the area. It's not just, you know, you're gonna put a building here, put a building there. What's the environment that people will live in? You know, what do they have to enjoy while they're there? Affordable housing. So I mean, this is saying it's facilitated through the Inwood zone. Inwood rezoning, you know, allowed for, you know, greater density. It didn't necessarily require affordable housing. If there's an area that is met for mandatory inclusionary housing, then yes, a development, they would have to have a percentage of the units that are affordable. If the project is financed, you know, through HPD or HDC or some city or state program, you know, then that's when affordability comes in. But the zoning in and of itself, maybe it allowed for that, because it allowed for greater density, so you could build more. But there's a lot of new development, obviously, in Inwood. I was in, over in the Bronx, this was maybe a year ago, I'm surprised that, you know, sitting over there, you had this huge mound, literally, of new development that you could see in Inwood from the Bronx. As I mentioned, sustainability and resiliency, and we know that Superstorm Sandy, the train yard became a lake. There are areas around Sherman Creek that are prone to flooding. They're actually in the flood zone. So as you are looking at new development, we've actually had a couple of projects come before us, and the ground plane has to be elevated so that the first floor is out of the floodplain, and there's no basement, there's no underground parking, because that would be in the floodplain. We have a couple of buildings that you know, came to us where we were looking at that. Now you can use that space for, it could be nicely landscaped, it could be, you know, recreational space. You could do wonderful things with landscape, but the whole idea is you're raising the building up. You know, we also can use zoning to provide incentives for community improvements. And we looked at a couple of projects, I think under City of Yes for what was the second one?
Small business or
The
something.
green system, getting a
There was
building.
one that basically, you get little zoning bonuses if, for example, if you incorporate an elevator for an adjacent subway station into your building. A lot of that was done in sort of like 8th Avenue in the theater district, but also new subway entrances are like built into the building when it's being done. And, the property developer, gets a bonus for that, but also it allows for improvements to the subway system or whatever it is that may not otherwise happen or may not happen at that time. I mean, you also have privately owned public spaces where, if you notice in some buildings, there's a sign that says the space is open to the public from X hours to X hours. Once again, that developer got a zoning bonus by including that space as a public space. And, there are requirements for the size and the views, and it's not supposed to be turned into a retail space. And as a perfect example, you may recall that the Trump Tower, that atrium is a privately owned space. And at one point, there were lots of kiosks in there selling various goods, and I think city
Modest.
mayor's office said, look, wait a minute, this has turned into a retail mall, and we're not saying it's a bad retail mall, but in a privately owned public space, you cannot devote all of the space to selling goods.
Radio Hotel has one of those, right?
It does not. It has a space that is sort of used that way at our suggestion, but it is not technically a privately owned public space.
Okay.
And once again, as I mentioned, this is what, the zoning map would look like. This is probably not the best venue for doing that, pulling it up, because when you pull it up on the computer, you can enlarge it and you can see things more clearly. But, I mean, you're going to see areas with designations, and that is the zoning district. You will see some shaded areas perhaps, and those are overlays, like this is telling you this is a special purpose district. I mentioned in some cases, there's special purpose districts, so, while this is a manufacturing area, this is a commercial area, this is if you see on here, this is an M2, this is an M1, but overlaid on that manufacturing is a special purpose district for stuff that I can't read here. But looking at a zoning map, those designations are giving you a sense of, what type of building is allowed there, at what density, and then if there's something, special going on, there'll be, legend somewhere, text telling you, well, what is the special purpose district, what's supposed to be happening there.
What would be an example?
Excuse me?
What would be like examples of special district? Is that like this?
Well, for example, when 125th Street was being rezoned, and the community was very concerned with the inclusion of arts and culture uses, that is not something that zoning in and of itself can control. It can say that as of right, you can build, you can build arts and culture, or to a community facility, or you can build commercial, or you can build residential. I don't think they did that. But when they created a special zoning district, Audrey can probably say better, they required that any building over X amount of square feet had to include a certain percentage for arts and culture. So in a special zoning district, you can have that requirement. If it's just zoning, it's like, well, you can do A, B, or C, but it's not telling you what you have to do. And I mentioned there are a bunch of tools that are useful to help us understand zoning. And everyone has this, so these are all live links if you go to the presentation. The zoning resolution, and I'm told that even experienced architects find the zoning resolution to be so unwieldy that the zoning handbook is such a helpful tool. When Scott Stringer was borough president, he bought zoning handbooks for all 12 community boards for every single member. But this is now available online. This is so helpful in
It's
understanding
absolutely wonderful.
what we're talking about.
Absolutely wonderful.
I mentioned Zola, pulling up the map. Zola is great for that.
I love that website.
Yeah. There's the equitable development data explorer, something that we discussed with city planning a few years ago. It looks at what are potential impacts of developments. And then you go to the DOB website and look at the status of permits. And that is the presentation.
I have a fun fact.
And what is your fun fact?
Last time I was there, the entire country of Switzerland does not have zoning at all. It's crazy. You go to the chemical factory next to an apartment.
Oh, wow.
Is there anything to
We
stop that
drove
from happening?
around and I saw that, I go, what the hell is that? I go, oh, we don't have zoning.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? They talk about it in cities like, is it Houston or other
Yeah,
cities
you said that.
that don't have zoning? But the point is, I think they have other, land use regulatory, things in place that, it's not that they take the place of zoning, but it's not quite a free for all. But that's,
OC had a question, did you notice that?
say that again?
OC had a question.
Well, if OC has a question, if someone over there can you promote OC to a panelist so she can unmute herself?
I think she said she couldn't talk.
Oh,
I don't,
did she put
is
it in
she
chat?
here? I don't see her. All right.
Well, I know on the chat.
It was
shows-
a
It was in the
Yeah.
chat.
Yeah.
Uh-oh, what did I do here?
Uh-oh.
OC vanished.
Yeah, oh no, here it is, okay. Yeah, I don't see her.
Okay.
Owl.
She participated?
But she was here before and
Yeah,
she
was there
put up
before.
on the chat.
Wait, can you click on
Look at
participants?
the one on the
On the
bottom.
bottom.
Chat.
She
The
should,
bottom
she should
screen.
put her on this, like,
Well, she might have signed in.
She said, "I have a question,"
But she
and
can
that
be
was-
promoted.
yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I love
I don't
the
see her
owl.
there.
Susan, what?
The new owl
Sorry.
is smarter than the old owl.
So that is land use 101.
Thank you.
A, and then there's 101B.
Yes, there is. But as I said, with the, adoption of City of Yes for housing opportunity, actually probably all of them, this land use zoning training needs to be updated. Audrey, any sense of who's gonna do that or when?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Can't hear you.
I wonder if the
Can you hear
owl
me
uses the
now?
volume on the actual physical.
I actually have a question.
It's up all the
Can-
way.
Can you hear me now?
Can't hear you.
Huh.
Ah.
Audrey, can you hear us?
I can hear you.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Great. When will the training be updated? Was that the question?
Yeah, when will
Okay,
it be updated to include whatever is required to reflect City of Yes?
The word that I've heard is December, but it's a soft deadline. But certainly in the next few months, and we're actively working on training materials. So that's where we're at.
Okay.
Yeah. But I also have to say that was a fantastic presentation, Wayne. That was really great. Do you want to do it for our 11 other community boards?
We can talk about that.
Sure.
Daniel,
Can,
why
who,
is this not
can
working?
anybody, there should be a
Is
microphone
there?
button.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when that one is turned off, then we can't hear over here.
Well, let's see if we can get the
How
owl
about
working,
now?
otherwise
How
we'll
about
turn
now?
that on when
I
other.
think
Is this, is the owl perhaps muted? No, that's still
No, but
on.
there's some other control somewhere else.
That's definitely muted now. Mute.
No, it's not muted.
Yeah, so it's not clear why.
Wouldn't you have to turn off the microphone on the back computer?
Oh, maybe. Yeah.
Turn back up.
So Audrey, can you hear me? Okay, so this has to stay on. Well, I guess we'll just have to figure it out later.
Who and can ask to change any land use laws, or is that even possible? So like, let's say, oh, we want to change this from a R7 to a R8, like, is that a possibility?
My understanding is, and Audrey can correct me if I'm wrong, any private individual, any private property owner, or an arm of government can request a zoning change. Meaning they could fill out an application and submit it to city planning. So it doesn't have to be Columbia University. It doesn't have to be the city of New York. If you own a property, you could submit an application and say you want it rezoned for whatever reason. And it will be, the application will be reviewed for completeness. If it's completed, then it will be referred out to the appropriate parties for review. And it can be approved or disapproved, but anyone can request it. Is that about right, Audrey?
That's about right. The only thing I'll add is that, we'll work with applicants, whether they're other agencies or private applicants or institutional applicants, to make it so that, let's say you own 1 or 2 lots, we're interested in having a rezoning be compatible with the surrounding look and feel and size of the neighborhood. And so there's often conversations, for example, an applicant will come and say, I'd just like to rezone the 2 lots that I own. And we, we'll work with them to come up usually with a more expansive zoning framework that takes into account some of those neighborhood characteristics, like extending it to a block or a half a block. And so we do that with HPD projects, with private applicants, things of that nature. So I hope that gives a little more insight, and happy to take questions.
It's great. No, try turning that one off. There was a function called echo canceling.
Oh, is it?
Oh, there you go.
I also see there's somebody in the chat, I don't know if there's questions.
So, actually, it's still on.
You turn off the output. Turn that down.
Can you just come here?
Let's see if this works.
One of the things that I learned from zoning was that there's certain buildings that you can't put ads on.
Well, on this, once again, is something that Audrey can probably answer better. When you say ads, I mean, if you look at the kind of signage that's in Times Square, that's only legal because of the zoning in that area. You cannot have that kind of signage just about anywhere. And other buildings, and we were talking about this, for example, with the United Palace, when they were updating their signage, they can't have advertising for, the new Honda that's coming out, or for, Coca-Cola. They can advertise their programs and events. So it's, if you're talking quite literally about ads for products and other things where people are selling, that is another instance where the area's zoning will dictate what is and is not permitted.
Yeah, because art is allowed, but not commercial.
Well, yeah,
Yeah, just to add on to that briefly, there are sign regulations for almost every district. The ones that I'm most familiar with are actually in Times Square because I've worked on a project there. And there's some areas of the city like that Times Square bow tie. Like the center of Times Square, where signage of a certain height and a certain brightness and a certain it's signage for entertainment or entertainment related uses is required. So that's, all the signs there are actually, a product of zoning.
right.
I had a question for Audrey. And I feel like I have heard this before, but do we have a sense of what percentage of development projects in the city do like apply for some type of variance versus build as of right?
Variance, you mean have to come to the city planning commission to build?
Yeah, just like what percentage of development happens as of right?
As of right.
The figure I've heard is 90 to 95% happens as of right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And that means they don't have to come.
Or anywhere else. But I mean, but when you think about it, that is the whole purpose of creating zoning.
Yeah.
That's the whole purpose of anything. If you create the rules and say, these are the rules, and if you follow the rules, then you can do whatever. I mean, absent that, everything would be,
Yeah.
a one-off.
Right, but also the Department of Buildings checks the plans to make sure the building is structurally sound, so you can't go some crazy thing where someone sneezes and it falls down. That wouldn't be good.
Great. So anything else for land use, or can we now shift to maybe discussing housing and land use?
Sure.
Great. So let me see, who do we,
Professor Benjamin.
no. This is Professor Porno. Actually, this is a group discussion because, what we,
Oh my God.
what we discussed last month as we were looking at the capital and expense priorities is, land use had a capital request from years past where we were talking about sort of creating RFPs that include, city, and then we modified the city and privately owned properties packaged with, subsidy funds and tax credits to develop affordable housing, sort of to implement what Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites plan, and structured in a way that respected the design and planning guidelines that we established for the area, that it spoke to affordability and contextual design and all that. We were saying, well, let's maybe pull that and instead let Housing and Human Services put in more specific projects. And then the end said, well, at this juncture, they didn't have more specific. So why don't we keep that in and then have some discussions so that, we can perhaps begin to formulate what those more specific things would be. So I'd reached out to Indiana to see if she wanted to come to tonight's meeting to begin that conversation. And here we are.
Thank you. So whenever we met last month, the Housing and Human Services Committee, I relayed basically what Wayne just highlighted, how, it would be great for our committee to identify maybe specific projects or properties. I think for us, we didn't really know what even the general guidelines are for considering a project. We had spoken, I can't remember now which of the community board meetings there was, but
Why isn't this?
I think it was our meeting last month. There
It's
was
probably because it's
discussion about a
easy.
building on 181st.
Ah,
And whether it was, we were unclear if the building was abandoned, if it was city owned or privately owned. But, you know, there was consensus, like, yes, we need to do something with this building. So I think as like a starting, you know, point, right, we need to figure out who owns the building. And, but I think like beyond that, if it's privately owned, right, that's not something that the community board can really do anything about unless we
If-
wanna try and advocate with.
If it's
the building
privately
owner, right?
owned, there's nothing that prevents the community board from reaching out to the private owner and trying to engage them.
Okay.
This is
But most
fun-
likely, like, right, realistically, that,
Well, we can't make them do anything. We can invite them to a meeting and say, well, what's going on, what are your plans? Or have you thought about, because, there are people who own property that may not be familiar with all of the, city programs that are available. I mean, developers and some community-based organization, community boards may be familiar with the alphabet soup of HPD programs that can help. If you happen to own a piece of property, to pay your taxes, you may not know how to navigate, HPD, HDC, landmarks, BSA, so it kind of sits there. Or, I mean, we've had instances where folks said, well, this property's been in my family for years, and we're thinking about doing this kind of project. And we would say, well, that project is, it's not permitted by zoning, it's much too big. We were talking, I forgot the name of the gentleman, it was a property a little further up from here. And they were talking about like a 36-story building, and said, well, your current zoning, you could do something much smaller. If you went to like the Board of Standards and Appeals or city planning to rezone it, to make it bigger, what would be the public benefit? Are you saying that it's going to be, more affordable? I mean, but we can have conversations. And some folks will be not interested, and some folks might entertain a conversation.
okay, so that would be for a privately owned, spot or building. What about for, like, if there's a city-owned building, right, then that, more clearly, right, like, we can engage. But, I mean, is our role as that committee like an advocacy kind of space? I think like we were just a little bit unclear, and maybe I should just speak for myself, like,
Let me
I'm a little bit
comment on
unclear.
that. And it was inherent in something Wayne said. Your committee has every right to advocate. Now, if it's private property, it's private property and they don't have to listen. But on the other hand, if your committee advocates for something and the landlord or the owner agrees that this is a good idea, but we absolutely have a right to advocate.
Okay.
But we cannot tell them what to do, obviously.
We can suggest what they
Oh, we
should do.
certainly can, but that's suggesting, and that's
Yeah.
all the difference in the world.
I'm thinking like the old Rite Aid building lot, right, that came up at our meeting. So, like, we can advocate that something be
And
done
we
there,
have.
and we have, right, but it's
Right.
ultimately like up to the developer, so then,
Was up to the owner, and Mr. Katsimatidis apparently loves this empty lot.
But here's the point. Now, this is something that Housing and Human Services can do, because we talked about this in not just land use. We pass resolutions, but what's the follow-up? And whether it's here or traffic and transportation, so we passed a resolution, and I asked at the last general meeting to the district manager, the resolution asks for two things. It asks for continued advocacy for development of the site. But in the interim, to have the city agencies that are responsible for ensuring that the sidewalks are kept clean and whether that's sanitation or DOT, that make sure the owner maintains the property. The answer that we got really focused more on the relationship with the owner and the attorney and how they used to be in contact, whatever. And that's on the development side. But there's nothing that prevents us from saying, the sidewalks are dirty, there's trash all over, you have a district service cabinet meeting on a monthly basis, and the Housing and Human Services Committee, would like to know what's being done, or TNT want to know what's being done to have those sidewalks clean. At the same time, you could try to find out from the district manager, whomever, who's the contact person that they were in touch with, and can you get them to come to a meeting? Can you talk about what the plans are? can you talk about what they're interested in doing? Because in some cases, you know, they're interested in doing X, Y, Z, which may not be what we're thinking of. But if they're interested in doing that, there may be a community-based organization or someone who might be interested in partnering with them on a project of that nature. So if you can find someone who's willing to talk, and there are times when you'll reach out to people until you're blue in the face and you won't get an answer. And there are times when someone will say, yeah, you know, we'll talk to you, we're not going to commit to anything, but that's better than nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanna, did I interrupt you?
No, no.
I just wanna, follow up on what Wayne is saying. There's an absolute requirement that the sidewalks be clean, and if they don't have their sidewalks clean, the Department of Sanitation will fine them. There's an absolute requirement that they don't allow a public nuisance to occur on that property, so it becomes this rat infested, horrible thing. And in fact, there was a program, I don't know whether it still exists, where if there were no fences around it, the city would actually put fences to keep things under control. So they can't do what, they can't ignore it, they can't allow it to endanger the neighborhood or whatever. But again, and the other thing, which is part of the advocacy, and it's why, your question is so appropriate. Another thing that one could do, and again, whether, in this specific case, Mr. Katsumakidis would agree to it, is it could, until he figures out what to do, become one of these, public spaces where they grow things, which would be a different committee.
And that was in the resolution.
Alternative
Right.
use or something,
Yes,
Like,
I'm,
like these public gardens or whatever.
yeah. And so, I mean,
But if he doesn't wanna do it, provided he doesn't create a public nuisance and we don't have a rat farm,
So using that as an example, and this is me getting like a little bit into the weeds, but
Literally.
yeah, yeah.
Very good.
Wouldn't that discussion, like, if I'm Katsumatidis, don't you have to think about things like liability and like things like that, right? Like, I see very little incentive if I'm the property owner to do that, to allow people on my property if I don't have if I'm gonna have liability over something that happens there, right? So I just raise it like I think what I'm trying to get a sense of is, okay, yes, ideally that's like our ideal, we're gonna reach out to private owners and we're gonna engage them and we're gonna come up, if we can encourage them to build, we're gonna try and come up with something for them to do in that property. In the meantime, that is the ideal. What I think are the more concrete things, or like where might we have a little bit more push? And so one of the ideas that I had, and I would love your thoughts on this, is there's a program where the city like forces an apartment building that has a lot of violations. They basically like give them a time frame and say like, you've got to correct these things within a certain window of time. Like, can we, in our budget, priorities, one of them was like increase the number of properties that are subjected to that kind of mandatory improvement timeline, or I forgot what I forgot what the acronym is, but is that something that kind of falls into this discussion, like where we engage the relevant city agencies, where we maybe identify buildings that have a high number of open complaints? Does that fall into this?
absolutely. There's no reason why Housing and Human Services can't say they want to sit down with HPD or Department of HPD and understand more about that program and how it works, what resources they have, and what resources they need to do a better job, so that when it comes time for budget priorities, you can say, do X, Y, Z for this program because you've talked about it in advance. And going back to, privately owned property, that's the kind of thing where if you've done some homework on, for example, the city has programs for these, streets that turn into plazas. And there typically is an organization that's responsible for, running it. That organization has to have liability insurance, whatever. So if you would say, use that as the model, you're not saying that the private property owner is taking liability, but said, well, we spoke to Parks or we spoke to DOT and, you know, they could work with you to have that property temporarily be a blah, under XYZ program, and the Community League of the Heights or this organ or that organ, you know, they would be the one running it, so it would be there, so you could present something, and they could say, didn't think about that, as long as it's not gonna cost me anything, fine.
Yeah,
Or they could say, no, I don't want anyone on my property.
that's a great
Yeah, but I mean,
idea.
it's like, instead of just saying, well, you know,
Yeah.
you do that, it's like, have you thought about doing this? And, you know, these are all the people, these are all the things that could help it move it forward without it being a burden on you.
That's a great idea, thank you.
I think part of it is also just when if you identify a number of the most nuisance kind of lots, and then we kind of know what's bothering people the most, and then you reach out to those private landowners. The idea is just that they'll be able to tell us if they are working on something or there's something they wanted to do that for some reason they weren't able to do. So just like knowledge is power in that case, and like starting there, so to see if advocacy would make sense in any situation.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's where, I forget if it's expense or, like, the expense item about like having planning staff, because like,
Yeah.
for example, the Housing Manhattanites identified a bunch of these like lots that are maybe derelict or otherwise ripe for development, but like to be able to follow up with like possibly like dozens of individual things, like that requires a lot of time, and we're all,
Yeah.
volunteers, so I think that's also a place where students or like part-time, like, a consultant, whatever, can be helpful. And sort of like being able to put these things together, on a larger scale.
So just as a question, did this committee before you guys then would identify like specific lots or buildings and like,
Land use never did that. I mean, when I first came on, land use almost had no, expenditure budget priorities, because it wasn't the kind of committee, like, it wasn't, parks or transportation where you're working closely with agencies that are building stuff. But we started looking at, from the planning perspective, we needed maybe a little more, support or staff from city planning. So on the expense side, we put that in. And then on the capital side, it's like, there's all this talk about, vacant city-owned property. What are you doing with that? So from a planning perspective, pull it together, put funds together to do something with that. But Housing and Human Services would say, the lot at the corner of Seaman and whatever that's been vacant, or, the property that, the city has been saying it's going to RFP for whatever, it's like, build this, or they would identify particular projects, or if they've been working with a community-based organization that has a project, supporting whatever funded that's needed for that. And that's another way, like, whether it's Community League of the Heights, or, if it's Isabella's building something, or if a private property owner, I mean, this is the kind of thing where if a private property owner is doing something, Rocky Mount Baptist Church is a prime example. What was built is like the second or third iteration, and one of the things that we advocated for years ago was for the allocation of low-income tax credits to make that project possible. Because we knew they were trying to do that, but without the low-income tax credits, you could build something, it wouldn't be affordable. And that's the whole issue in so many instances. Yes, you can build something, but for it to be affordable, you need either the city grant funds to, buy down the cost, or the low-income tax credits so that the private investors come in and buy those tax credits and buy down the cost. Otherwise, you're, what is construction cost now? $500 a square foot, but and in some cases, the land costs more than the construction. So that would be a perfect opportunity to advocate for something, because there's a specific project, and you know what it is, but you also know what's preventing it from moving forward.
well,
And actually, the other thing you could do is you can call people in. I mean, the organizations that have done housing in the past say, well, what's on your plate? We're interested in knowing what you're thinking about. what's in the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, and that is something that we definitely have on our to-do list, is to invite organizations to come. I reached out to the Department of City Planning, and they got back to me right away, so I'm really grateful. They're gonna maybe come in December or soon, one of our upcoming meetings, to present and give us kind of a broad sense of what they do and ways that we can engage. I also reached out to HPD. They were less interested in coming.
Really?
So I'm going to follow up on that. And so, yeah, maybe I can chat with you and maybe get some tips on how to engage them better, but
You might reach out to the borough president's office to see if they have a contact or someone at HPD who, they normally work. I find it odd that HPD wouldn't want to let you know what they're doing.
they replied and they're like, well, if you have a specific thing that you want us to come and present on, then let us know. I was like, okay. So I'm gonna write them back and say, thank you so much,
Well, that program that you
we're also
mentioned.
looking for like a very, yes, exactly. But also like most of us benefit greatly from a 101 too, right? And so my goal is to have them come to our meetings the way that Department of City Planning regularly attends these meetings. And so I will keep working on that. But yeah, I mean, I think for us, we saw like more concretely what we can do to help people who are like in bad conditions, right? In existing housing that like their landlords are letting fall apart. And so I appreciate the ideas, and we will maybe invite like Cloth and some of those other organizations and see if there are specific projects that we can help advocate for. And then maybe the other thing I'll do is reach out, I don't know to who, so I love your ideas, but like, are there any other requirements like legal liabilities? Who needs to be CC'd if we reach out to a private property owner? Like, I don't know, do we have guidelines like that?
I don't know if there's any legal liability for trying to
Just,
talk
like,
to someone.
engaging them? Okay.
Yeah, but the other thing that sometimes CB12 has done well, but I've seen like CB9 do to a greater extent. There are all of these issues regarding HDFC co-ops and the HDFC coalition, and there's like legislation coming out of City Hall or out of Albany that's threatening to do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of those conversations happen, at their housing committee meetings. And I was amazed that when under the de Blasio administration, they were trying to push rules that would have basically taken like all of the autonomy away from HDFC co-ops and put in, supervisors over their reserve funds and all kinds of things. CB, 9 and 10, but particularly CB9, they were on it, and CB12 was less so.
Okay.
I just want to comment on the liability aspect. We are city officials, and that means provided we stay within our guidelines. Of course, we have to find out what they are, but, well, let's go back a step. There is a law department, and you can contact them and find out, am I allowed to do this? But provided you stay within the confines of what we are allowed to do, they will protect us.
That's great, thank you.
Sure. But again, and that was inherent what I said, we can't run wild. We check
Yeah.
with the law department, obviously.
And I think, given that I brought up liability 2 or 3 times, I'm not gonna run wild. I'm the opposite. I'm like, okay, who do we need to check in at every single step? Okay, well, I appreciate that, and any ideas that you guys have, please.
Well, I'm personally
please
so happy that you are here with us, because it broadens our perspective as a committee, and there are probably additional ways we can coordinate.
Yeah, I would love that.
Will make our board more effective.
Thank you. Honestly, our board is really eager to like take on a project or get really, like roll our sleeves up. But I think that we're just we would love some guidance, so thank you, Wayne and others. But yeah, I mean, I think that's it on my end in terms of what we've talked about, and if we'll keep you updated.
Great. OC has a question in chat. I don't know if she's unable to speak, but it's not related to this. But she's asking how the propositions that passed yesterday are going to change how community boards comment on new developments. And I mean, it's going to change, not how we comment, but it's the timeline. You know, so now that it's passed, in the instances where there's an expedited review, instead of having 60 days for us and then 30 days for the borough president, it's going to be 60 days for us and the borough president. So we will have to work with now a brand new borough president, and coordinate very closely to ensure that, you know, whatever concerns we have are communicated to them, and that, you know, we sort of reconcile to the extent possible what we are saying about the application. The other two don't affect community boards per se, but they affect, you know, whether it's going to the city council, or if it's going to the Board of Standards and Appeals instead, or whether it's going to some three-person panel that's going to make the final decision.
Yeah, I want to comment on that. I have a sense, because I think that three-person panel are three elected officials, that panel, and I ran this by one of our board members who is a lawyer, will be anonymous about that, but that may actually violate no one in this room. That may actually violate one person, one vote. Because we used to have a board of estimate that had this whole collection of people in it, and because of it's the way it was constituted, because I think there was a representative from each borough, but boroughs had different populations, that was thrown out because it violated one person.
Yeah,
one
and the
vote.
city council got a lot of their power.
Right, so I suspect, and I'm sure the city council is already thinking of this, or maybe the people who proposed it already answered that question. It could violate one person, one vote.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think the difference is what
That's why I get picked up.
what this panel is doing, instead of going through the Euler process and the city council passes something, the mayor approves or vetoes it, and then the city council can override. Instead, it goes to the panel that consists of, I think, the mayor, the borough president for, you know, whatever borough's in, and the city council speaker. And, you know, if two of the three decide to override what the city council has done, as opposed to going to the mayor to veto it. So it's a slightly different thing, but it'll be interesting to see if someone comes up with that, you know, with that argument.
Well, I wonder, in terms of the cases where the borough president review will be consolidated into the same timeline, if community boards, once the borough president settles in, if community boards will get together to, Manhattan community boards to create some sort of procedure in which we can make sure that before they begin any like substantive review, that we make sure that they're on the same page of, we want our things to be in before, and also if there's any kind of method of getting like extensions.
Well,
on that.
see, that's the thing, you don't get extensions.
Yeah. Mhm.
And we always say, oh, no, it's not enough time. They said, your clock has just begun. You've got 60 days.
But-
I think in one case, there was an extension for the whole process
Uh-huh.
because of something.
But the other thing, you wanna go first?
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Age before. The other thing, and I think, you know, as Wayne already alluded to, so does you, I think because this is all mushed together now, we and the borough president, you know, may wanna just subdivide this time so, you know, because it makes sense for the community board to consider it first and, you know, inform the borough president's thinking on what we wanna do. So, and again, within, among us chickens, we can decide, we'll do it for 30 days, and then the borough president, and then that organization is, I think, something we could do, and it probably is something that would be wise to do rather, because right now it's just a mush.
Yeah, but here's the other thing, and I don't know exactly when it changed, but I remember when Scott Stringer was borough president, and I believe the same was true with the Virginia Fields, their land use or planning staffer assigned to community, they would attend our meeting pretty frequently. And that really hasn't happened under Mark. We've had them, I think if we ask them to come, sometimes we'll get them. But it's not as like city planning that they're almost always here. And that's
They had more of them.
but that's the thing. So it's like, how is that going to work? Because if we are more closely coordinated, particularly on these applications, then it's not that we're working on it, then they're working, it's like we're working on it together.
Well, that's good, but the thing we don't wanna do is work at cross purposes.
Absolutely.
Right.
So it actually, you set up my next question perfectly. Is there, it's two questions. One is I guess maybe for DCP, like, will there be a rulemaking process where they're gonna pin down kind of some of the nitty gritty? And if so, can they engage with our committees early on so that we can provide feedback as opposed to like when they, basically like post these rules? And then before looking for that, the other thing that we were thinking is, can we, as a community board, say that like, or somehow negotiate or rules or whatever, but can we say like, the clock doesn't start until we've got like all of these things, and set like specific requirements of the information that we need, or, like, should we, as a board, set like a planning or an additional meeting once a month where like, in case we get an application, that's gonna be the time that we talk about, these things. Like, I'm thinking about the fact that how many things happen over the summer, right? Like conveniently timed over the summer when community boards are out. Like, can we do something to say like, yes, this process is in place, but things are not gonna move in July and August. Why? Because community boards aren't meeting. Are there like any kind of things that we can do to buttress to make sure that like, we've got like a standing appointment when like anything to like standardize this on our end?
So, and Audrey can chime in. We actually passed a resolution or two expressing concern with applications that, are forwarded in June and have a 60-day timeframe, because then it's in the summer, or even in late May, because depending on when it hits, you might have just missed land use, and then the agenda for June is full. We've made the recommendation, no one has paid attention to it. On the more positive side, going back to years past, working with both the borough president's office and with city planning, when there are things coming down the pike that were going to turn into an application that was be presented to us, we'd get a heads up. And there'd be some discussion that, city planning received an application. It's not, as I mentioned during the presentation, until city planning has certified the application as complete, it doesn't go to review. And if city planning never certifies it complete, it never goes out for review. But if they said, we've got this application and they're looking to, rezone 4.5 blocks just north of the hospital, this is what we see as being, of interest. We're giving you a heads up that at some point, maybe in 3 months, it'll be coming your way. So that kind of coordination happened in, the past, and I remember having these discussions both with staff from the borough president's office and also from city planning. So that can help. Audrey, I guess the initial question is, would there be rulemaking that, follows these proposals that have been adopted? And if so, is there going to be an opportunity for input on the rulemaking? And then, with shortened timeframes, is there a way to sort of standardize enhanced coordination?
Those are great questions and really important questions. I wish that I had the answer for you tonight. We have not, like borough planners like myself have not gotten any feedback on the info or any further guidance on implementation or timelines or how this will work, but that's certainly something that I will keep the committee informed about. So yeah, that's where we're at. I wish I had more news, but that's where it is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I was gonna say, to the extent that something comes in June, is there like some sort of mandate or rule that we can't meet in the summer? Like, or like what happens when that happens?
We can and we have, there's something called the Committee of the Whole, which is a July meeting. But I mean, the chair can decide that, this committee needs to consider it. But anything that we were to adopt or approve in the summer, when we came back into regular session in September, it will be presented to the board to be ratified.
But that could be an issue with the 60 days if something comes in May and then, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
that's-
and we've
that's what you're saying,
unfortunately
yeah.
had to do that on a number of occasions where we had to approve something in July or August, and then at the September meeting, we said, this was approved by, the executive committee or by the chair, whomever, because, the time, the timeline ended in the summer, we were unable to get an extension. But Jim,
Yeah,
it's too cold in here.
Yes.
Yes, it is cold in here. That's why I'm wearing my winter coat. But anyway, once something is certified, the clock starts, and it just runs for 60 days, and that's the end of it, and we have no control of that. So that's one unfortunate piece of it. The second unfortunate piece of that is that sometimes organizations or whatever will cynically do something over the summer to essentially prevent us from doing it. Because we're not required to meet during. And just to follow up on what Wayne is talking about, we do have a bunch of these circuit breakers, if you like, so that if the committee of the whole decides on something, and this can also be done independently by the executive committee, and it can actually also be done independently by the board chair in case of a time emergency. And in fact, you may have seen this happen where the chair will do something on behalf of the board, but then it has to be, normally it's ratified at the next general meeting. When the board chair does this, or the executive committee does this, it goes into effect. And the presumption is that it will be ratified. So that means whatever person or body does this has to be circumspect, because you don't want it to be overturned, because we'll look like a pack of idiots. Or they will look like it. And generally that has never happened, because, the executive committee and the chairperson, they have a sense already of what the board will and won't want. So they won't, do something like that.
I'm sure it is 8:45.
And freezing.
Well, no, so is there more discussion vis-a-vis housing? Is there any old business or new business?
Yeah, it's cold.
Is there a motion to adjourn then?
Motion.
Second.
It is now 8:46 and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone who joined us in person. Thank you for everyone who joined us online.
I wanna compliment you on your 101, it was actually quite
Thank you so
palatable.
much. Thank you.
Very palatable.
And I want to thank the Borough President's Office, Department of City Planning for letting me steal their material.
We'll follow up with more information.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
when it becomes available. Thank you. Good